Hey, welcome to the Everyday Leader Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, me, Matt Harrington. We go into my story and experiences around leadership that have led me to where I am today. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Everyday Leader Podcast. Leadership is a choice. Join me, Matt, and my co-hosts Drew and Tate each episode as we break down how to lead powerfully in your family, team, and organization.
Welcome to the Everyday Leader Podcast, where we empower people to live like leaders today.
So today, we got our special guest, Matt Harrington, co-member of our show. He's going to lead us through kind of the beginnings of his journey, where he's been, how he got here today, kind of give us a little insight into his life.
Yeah, Matt's a super powerful leader. I'm lucky enough to work with him. I like to call him the culture king. He's amazing at working with teams and organizations, and I'm sure he's going to share a little bit about that with us. And Matt, we're excited to put this spotlight on you today and let the world know who you are.
Yeah, this is kind of fun to set this up this way to where we are interviewing each other. I'm sure it won't be the last time, and it seems like a great way to help our listeners find out a little bit more about each of us. So stoked to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Well, Matt, tell us a little bit about your background and growing up, and then let's share with our audience and listeners what you do.
Yeah. So I grew up on a farm in southern Arizona. I have 7 sisters and no brothers, which is kind of a little claim to fame, I guess. Not a lot of people can say that, right? And the most common response I get when I say that to people is like, "Oh, you poor thing." And that is so inaccurate. Like, I will say that not having a brother was a bummer, for sure. And having that many sisters was not like a burden by any means. And in fact, I actually look at my experience growing up with that many sisters as a real blessing in my life. And it really helped me develop skills and perspectives and ways of being that are really useful to me right now in what I'm engaged in. So
You're the youngest, right?
second to youngest.
Second youngest.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the other kind of joke is that I had 7 moms because I have 6 older sisters and one mom. So, great way to grow up. Big family, close family. Grew up on a farm. So, didn't have a lot of material things. Grew up working and, working the land.
Were you the only one that had to work hard too?
Well,
Like,
I was
sisters get in on that, or did you get extra chores?
I was young. And so really I actually worked on the farm less because by the time I was old enough to start working, we were getting out of it. And so about the time I was old enough to start really doing things, we were wrapping it up. So, yeah, I mean, it was a great way to grow up for sure. And agriculture was just a part of who we were. I mean, it was a big part of our identity as a family. And for me personally, right, there was a lot to that for me as far as like our heritage and those that kind of had come before us and been a part of agriculture and what it meant to still be involved in feeding the world. So as I got older, I was involved in agricultural organizations for youth like FFA and 4-H. And that was, along with like Boy Scouts of America and other things in church, that was my exposure to like leadership development, if you will, at a really young age. And I totally took it for granted, probably like a lot of kids do. Enjoyed the experiences and had fun and had no idea that I was even really engaged in leadership development. And so fast forward, several years, get out of high school, get into college. That was still my priority, was agriculture. Like, hey, I have a definite like entrepreneurial mind. And so I want to go revolutionize things in the agricultural industry, specifically in the area that I grew up, because it's like people that I care about and something I feel really strongly about. And that was actually a really powerful guide for me for a long time. It influenced what I studied in school and the businesses that I started and what I was engaged in. So awesome experiences all the way around. And several years ago, I was out at our grow yard. So we were managing and taking care of other people's cattle for them was the business that we had started in 2020. And we had a bunch of sick calves. There was a lot going on that day. It was hot and windy. And I remember just kind of like stepping back. I even think I took a picture or a video on my phone to just kind of capture that moment and asking myself, like, what am I doing? And I just remember this really distinct impression and kind of hearing in my mind, like, there are no people here. that was the moment that really gave me the courage to be like, okay, I am not on this earth to develop cattle. I want to develop people. I started to shut all of my agricultural ventures down that day. And I mean, people talk about,
were there several?
Yeah, there were. And we're not going to get into all of them. All of them were great learning experiences. People talk about how hard it is to start a business. It is a challenge to end one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you got people that are depending on you and animals in this case. And anyways, we did. And a great opportunity came very shortly thereafter to go and work for an agricultural company in people development. So it was just ideal. And so my ag background was definitely valued. And in that role, I did nothing with the actual agriculture. Like it was all workshops, trainings, and people development. So it was an amazing experience. I can say that it really opened my eyes to just like, there's a lot more out there in the world. And, you know, a lot more things are possible than I probably originally thought or could see. The other thing that it helped me see was just how functional and dysfunctional things can be in a large organization. And I started to become really fascinated with like, what is the disconnect here? Why does the executive suite kind of say these kind of things? And everyone I'm talking to that's on the ground, boots on the ground, are saying totally different things. Like there's this big disconnect and not a lot of trust at times. And so because of my role, I was the person that people would go tell this stuff to from the field. And so I had a really unique perspective to gather information from boots on the ground and also be in a lot of the leadership meetings. And I just became fascinated with how do we create an organization where this dysfunctionality, it just seems so unnecessary to me. Right. And what is it going to take to do that? So I just became a student of that in that role. And it was a great experience.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you're at now from there.
Yeah.
'Cause you're in a different role now.
Yeah, definitely. So right around maybe like a year and a half into that role, I was really getting more bold and confident in like putting myself out there or in front of people in that organization to take a stand for like what I believed and what I could see were the solutions. And it was right around that time that I met Chris Smith. And we started talking one night at a basketball game, and he had just come back from somewhere where he had talked about what he called the culture operating system. And so he shared some of those concepts with me, and I was like, man, this is a ton of what I've been thinking, what I've been looking at, like assembling and putting together as far as like how to deliver some of these concepts. So shortly thereafter, we just kind of started talking like, hey, well, why don't we do some of this stuff together? So that's what we worked towards. And it took about 10 months for that to really develop and be created. And ultimately that is what happened. Like I left that role and that opportunity to join Chris and really expand the work that he was doing into more of like a leadership and culture deliverable for teams and businesses and organizations.
Awesome.
So, you know, going back and some of the building blocks, you know, ag to leadership, cultures, and, you know, bigger businesses, like how do you see the way those building blocks kind of affected where you ended up?
Yeah. You know, it's fun to look back, and it has been limiting for me at times, to be honest, something I've had to work on, right? Because it just, from the outside, it seems insane to think that you can go from, you know, something so distant from what I'm doing now to what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually love that, not that I could do anything about it, right? Because I can't change my story.
Mm-hmm.
I actually love that's my story because it's a real demonstration that anything is possible, right? Like if you decide you are passionate about something and become a student of it and practice and get committed to it, well then, yeah, you can become effective in that. I will say, however, that those building blocks, to your point, Tate, did influence me more than I was aware of at the time, for sure. And just the way I was interacted with by other leaders or people who cared about me or people who created environments for me to thrive, that all really meant something to me. And now in hindsight, I can see like, wow, that doesn't happen by accident. And I think that's one of the real keys, is that it can be easy to just kind of let things happen by default. That's not super powerful. And so it's cool to look back and realize, man, a lot of people really showed up for me powerfully and helped intentionally create an environment for me to thrive. And that's awesome.
So do you think because of like your start on the farm and kind of your interest at the time that maybe you connected more with kind of the leaders that were in that world? Not to say they were more influential than, say, a sports coach or, a church leader or something like that, but you almost had that connection with them
Yes.
before you even started.
Yeah, definitely. Because there's also, beyond just like how they're showing up, which is great, there's also like this shared, now I would use the term like shared identity, right?
Yeah.
Like, because we're tied together, anchored together by bigger vision of agriculture. So yeah, absolutely.
I've been lucky to like actually, one, work with you, Matt, and then two, see some of the work you've done with organizations and with teams. And you've actually been a part of some incredible experiences, creating some incredible cultures. And you've had the chance to work with some pretty amazing and powerful leaders. What have you seen as like, what has made a great leader in those organizations, and what has helped them maybe take a team that not that there was huge problems, but like create how is their development as a leader really improved the teams that they have working with them?
Yeah. There's so many things to be said here. And the one that just is the most present with me and that comes up is their willingness to take responsibility. And I almost shy away from using that term because it's just another one of those kind of diluted terms in our society and in our language. What I mean is when they are willing to truly look at each circumstance, each person, each relationship in their sphere, in their stewardship, and say like, what can I do? Who can I be? How can I take responsibility for shifting this, adjusting this, improving this? It really just makes such a big difference. As long as a leader is trying to deflect responsibility or put the blame or onus on someone else, it's just not powerful. Like people subconsciously, because most people couldn't point that out, but it subconsciously really just diminishes their effectiveness. So I actually, kind of a part of my story that gets woven into this is in between shutting down the ag businesses and starting to work with Chris. So while I was at that other role, I started a business with a friend of mine, completely outside of any industry either of us had ever been in, against all of my intuition, because I had just said to myself, like, I'm not going to start a business that I'm not super passionate about. And then I did. And it was, again, a great experience because I learned a lot. Financially horrible, and in many other ways, just not good. And so around the end of that time period, when we're kind of like ending that venture, I was just in a spot where I'm like, what am I doing? I did it again. Like, I don't feel like I've learned from my past experiences as good as I could. I wasn't thrilled with the way I was showing up in my family at the time. And again, not like anything crazy. I just didn't feel really intentional. I didn't feel really powerful in the way I was showing up for them. And for whatever reason, I reached out, went to like ask someone for like some outside perspective and legitimate like help. And that was one of the best things I ever did. And I didn't know anything about that world at the time, per se, as far as like the world of like coaching or performance coaching or anything like that. In fact, I believed probably both of the myths about coaching previously, which is like coaching is for rich people or coaching is for like weird people who have a lot of problems, right? It was probably the things that I believed, right? And it was my way of taking responsibility. Like, okay, there's things in my life right now that are not the way I want them to be. And fortunately, I reached out, like in an effort to look inward, right? To be like, hey, well, who can help me see something that I can't see, so that I can address these things? Yeah, that ended up being massive. So I was just about to say earlier, instead of blaming my wife, I took responsibility. That's one of the biggest things that I learned early on. Is like, I really had been approaching Kelsey over the years, just with, not all the time and not maliciously, with kind of an agenda, with like, I want Kelsey to change some things. I honestly was willing to change things myself too. And I just really learned real quick that was not useful. Like, that was not powerful. It was not creating anything good for us. Again, going back to like my whole point here is looking inside. That's where you find all the answers. Like you want something to shift in a marriage, in a company, in your revenue, in your income, in your family, you're going to find those answers inside you. And as long as you're looking outside, you'll be a less effective leader than you could be otherwise.
I just want to mention that, that's one of the things that I've always admired about you is your resiliency. And, there's so many people that, because of humble beginnings or failed attempts at different businesses or whatever, would, had a gazillion different things to blame. And, that's not you. That's not the way you think. That's not the way you talk. And that says a lot. And your ability to kind of share that same aura about yourself to other people, I think is amazing.
Yeah. No, thanks, man. And just, I think it's useful for our listeners to know that Tate's one of the people that was a, for lack of a better term, client in some of my ag businesses, and never batted an eye at like the changes I would make or the things. And that cannot be said for everyone else. I mean, really confronting for people to watch someone go from, helping them with their cows to helping them with their culture and leadership development at a company. That's really confronting for a lot of people. And it never was for Tate. And I appreciate that. It helped me keep going when I myself was confronted by that. So,
well, before we wrap up, all of us wanted to come together and do this podcast together. I guess why is just the topic of leadership so important to you? Like, why is this something you wanted to talk about with people every day? Yeah,
no, I love that. A couple years ago, again, kind of as a result of the work I did with a coach, my really good friend Mitch, a big part of what has got me here today, I realized that when I asked myself the question, like, what do I want to be known for? Which is a question that we ask all companies that we work with now, because it's your identity, right? What I really found, and it was a pattern that I had not been able to like really pinpoint, but in hindsight, I could see like, yeah, that always came up for me. I really want people to be able to live free, like to have real freedom, not just governmental, physical freedom, but like to not create a self-imposed prison for themselves. Then with that freedom, go be a leader to propagate more freedom. And so that's the answer to the question. And those two things guide me in everything I do. If it's not aligned with those two things, fortunately, I've done a lot of work to calm my squirrel syndrome. And yeah, if it's not aligned with those two things, you can count on me not being super involved. And this is aligned with that. And it's a way for me to really help people see the possibility of living free and what it means and new perspectives and insights on how to be a leader.
Awesome.
Love it, man.
Well, any last thoughts, Matt?
No, this is awesome. I think it's awesome that we're doing this together, because for our listeners, just so you know, like each one of us really does strive to do this for, to be a leader for each other on a regular basis. And not because like we have roles or titles or structures that require that or that are asking that of us, rather because we, care about each other and care about the purpose that unites us. So that's exciting.
Totally.
I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, glad our listeners got to get to know you a little bit better today.
Yeah. Great questions. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on the Everyday Leader podcast. If you're ready to take your leadership journey even further, subscribe to our weekly newsletter for more insights and practical tips. And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram to stay a part of our growing community. Just follow the links in the show notes. If this episode impacted you, please help us spread the word and share the link with a friend from wherever you're listening.